I don't know what level of understanding you guys have of the Flying Yankee and the details, so we'll do a little bit of, what's this thing and why is it special? I want to talk about the restoration efforts before 2010, a little events from 2010 to 2021, and then sort of the whole restart that actually, it still feels like a restart, but it's been going on since 2021. Um, Tell you about the current condition of the train, what's fixed, what's not fixed, what's still to be done, all that. And then our love affair with the state of New Hampshire on getting them to like see the light that maybe doing something different is a good idea. And then I'll tell you about the process that is actually going on right now as we speak. So the operating history of the train, it was ordered from Bud in 34 and delivered to the B&M in 35. It was the second Zephyr to be made. It started running from Boston to Bangor, and it did that really until 1944. And the only reason it moved off of 44 is because of the wartime traffic was so high between Boston and Portland, and the train is only 132 people. So they were forced to take it off and find a different route. So what became the Mountaineer, every time they changed the route, they changed the name, put a new plaque on the front of the train. So it ran for a while as the Mountaineer up through Boston to Littleton, up through North Conway, through the Notch. So all those pictures you see, that was really what was going on. They pulled it off that, and this is probably the second longest run when it was running as the Cheshire from Boston to White River. Several years doing that. Started bouncing around a little bit, became the Minuteman going to Troy until 55. Went back to the original Boston to Portland route as the businessman. A lot of people don't know there was actually a businessman. They never made it. It's funny, they had plaques for all of these. The businessman never had its own plaque. So, and then the last, the Minuteman to Boston, back off to Troy for a couple of years. And then that was it. They retired it in 57. It was purchased and went to Edaville. And then here's the bad part. It sat there for 36 years. Nothing covered up, everything open. So the 36 years sitting out in the elements really, really took its toll. So why is the train so important? Well, first, it's obviously part of the Zephyr family. There were 10 Zephyr trains actually made. As I said, it was number 2. That's sort of like all stainless steel aircraft, make it look new and shiny and sleek looking. So it was trying to gain public attention and try to get some people more interested in train travel. Because of its articulated construction, missing a couple of trucks, very lightweight, very fast, comfortable. And this is the other big thing is it was cheaper to run and easier to service compared to passenger trains being run by steam engines at this same time. So there was some economic stimulation to it as well. It had sealed windows, air conditioned, very plush interior to try to attract people, and it had the Winton 201A in it, which was really the first commercially successful diesel engine. It's the grandfather of the EMD 567. And and this is you'll hear, we'll talk about this, but this is the problem for us right now. But anyway, so and then the train is a transition technology between steam and diesel passenger trains. So that's why it's important. So the restoration history, Morrill purchased it in 1990. Morrill was the owner of Storyland in New Hampshire, quite an entrepreneur, and had a lot of plans for the train that I imagine most of you in the room don't know about. Moved it to Glen until 93. It took that long to kind of get the thing moved, awaiting for restoration. And this is what he was going to do with it. It was something called the Mountain Division. And for 5 years, they planned out a whole new company that was going to run up through the Notch, because at this time, the state of New Hampshire was putting the Notch on, looking for requests for proposals to have somebody run that, because at this point, it was out of service Conway Scenic only ran up so far. So it was out there for bid. And he wanted to put a bid on that line and run it. And it was called the Mountain Division. This is actually Morrill sitting in the cab. And it was going to run from Attitash all the way up to Fabians. And he was going to have two trains. He was going to restore the Yankee. He was also going to have another train with F units and traditional passenger cars. So they were just going to run these things back and forth up through the notch. And his proposal also included a lot of development. This is at Attitash. They were going to put in a small yard, a Y, and a bunch of retail, hotels, condos, really big, attractive development at that site. And then this is actually the base lodge and depot. So the train would actually come in here, load and unload. And when it was at Fabian's, they didn't have enough room for a Y. So the proposal was this 200-foot turntable. Yeah. Yeah. So I've never seen a 200-foot turntable, but so this whole thing, I actually have in the archives his actual submission to the state of New Hampshire for this whole project, and he was competing against Conway Scenic. So, guess what? He didn't get it. So his next bright idea was, well, okay, I'm done. What do I do with this thing? I think the state of New Hampshire should own it. And the New Hampshire took ownership of the train. He sold it to him for $1. And I will tell you, I have documentation from the New Hampshire Department of Transportation, who was saddled with the responsibility of this thing. They didn't want it. But he was a pretty persuasive guy, a lot of political connections, and the governor said, you will take it. So I actually don't know, but I have a letter from the governor and all that stuff. So at the same time, the Flying Yankee Restoration Group was formed in '96. The role of that group was to raise funds and coordinate the restoration of the train. So the state only had to provide rail and some sort of clerical support. That's all they had to do. So they decide, they really didn't look around too much as to where to do this work. They actually fiddled with maybe taking it off to Canada and doing the work there, but it came back that no, the work needs to be done in New Hampshire to benefit New Hampshire companies who might work on it. So they ended up giving it to the Claremont and Concord, and it was there from '97. Really in 2003, all work stopped, and it kind of sat there in limbo until it was finally moved up to the hobo. But the restoration that was done on the train, and there really was a lot of work done on the train, 90% of it was done at Claremont. So it goes to Lincoln in 2005 with the hobo. The plan was to restart the restoration there. Ben Clark put together a really very detailed plan on how he was going to complete the restoration. But unfortunately, it just didn't go anywhere. The only thing that was done while I was at Lincoln, they did redo the trucks. And if anyone knows anything about Bud cars, they leak. So they had the roof sealed in 2010, but really that was it. So nothing has been done to the train for 13 years. It's just been sort of sitting there. I had a cover on it for about 8 years, a little tent. Remember the tent? But that eventually rotted away. So it's been sitting out for about 6 years now. So what's been done to the train? The train was in much, much worse shape than anybody thought when they said, let's restore this thing. There was a pretty good accident in, I think, '45, where the thing ran into the station at Walpole. They actually, when they got it to Claremont, the A car, which is the first car, was still out of alignment because the B&M never really fixed the damage from that collision. So they ended up fixing that. They had to rebuild the whole nose of the thing. Um, and all the doors and supporting structures were rebuilt. Behind the stainless steel is wrought iron iron that rusted through. So there was a lot of work on the interior that nobody ever saw that had to be repaired. And you'll see some pictures of that. So all the seats that were in were all pulled out. They've all been reupholstered. They are sitting saran wrapped in a container. So those are all good. We don't know exactly if we'll be able to use those seats and have to redo it again. We'll know when we get in there. The main generator and auxiliary generator were both rebuilt. Traction motors were rebuilt. Trucks were rebuilt. They had new fuel tanks that were basically took the old fuel tanks and just made new ones. Same thing with the air tanks. And there's actually sitting in boxes a custom made brake system from Westinghouse that's ready, was built for the train, is ready to go on the train whenever the restoration starts again. The Winton. So I've seen it. It exists. It looks pretty good. The block was repaired and refinished. The crankshaft was reconditioned and actually installed. In fact, we were up there looking at it, and you can turn it by hand, so it's looks pretty good. We have 10 new pistons were made. These were reverse engineered from the originals, which was wicked expensive. Cost several $100,000 to do this. And sleeves. So we have 2 extra pistons and 2 extra sleeves. The 8 sleeves were installed in the block. They're in there now. New injectors were made from scratch, again, reverse engineered. All the glass has been replaced. All the other parts that you don't see in the train now are sitting in containers on a DOT site up in New Hampshire. So, and we've been up there. But I want to give you an idea of what they were dealing with. This is the, as it arrived, this is the Winton, and you can see it's in great shape there after, 36 years in the elements. This is what Claremont and Concord did to it. So you can see it looks pretty spiffy there. Did very nice work on it. This is the second car, the B car. You can see it has arrived, all water damage, and the seats are in pretty bad shape, floors in pretty bad shape. They did actually finish most of the B car, and if you've been up there and seen it, looked in the windows, you can see that's in pretty good shape. That's really the only part of the train that's done. This is the cab. You can see the kind of condition they got it in what Claremont and Concord was able to do with it. So they've done a really nice job, and it's in fairly good shape. All that's been rebuilt. And this is what I'm talking about, the structures underneath the stainless steel. This is all not stainless steel, but just iron. You can see what the kind of condition it was. So this was around all the doors, all the interior parts, and all of this had to be replaced. That nose was literally cut off from here down and completely rebuilt. So in 2008 to 2015, you kind of see this like this. Funds were not rolling in. Most of the money was gone. There was a lot of turnover on the board, and it kind of, there was no plans to do much with it. In 2016, there was an attempt to sort of restart things. A lot of discussion with the state, no real change in direction. And then this starts raising its heads. Ben Clark at Hobo says, look, this thing's been sitting here. I need the space. I want it out of here. So he started pushing the state, who was the owner of the thing, to move it out. So the state controls the restoration at this point. They say, look, let's not try to restore it. Let's put it on static display. So they're all ready to put it at the White Mountain Attractions building, which is actually across the street from the entrance to Hobo. It's a building that a lot of tourists kind of go to. They're going to put it in the parking lot. It was a pretty good deal. They're ready to do it. They were going to put it back on its trucks. The last minute, the whole thing fell apart. which is unfortunate. And then since then, was real no direction. The state is just not interested. The board was down to 3 members. And if you know anything about New Hampshire board structures for a nonprofit, the minimum board number is 5. So they were essentially kind of out of business at this point. So a bunch of fools got together in 21 and said, oh, we can do it better, which is the current board. It's a real mixed group of people. We spent a year, first of all, finding out where all the hell the documents were to tell us what happened. And it was all over the place. We had file cabinets in this place and file cabinets in that place. And Mary sent us something that her husband, who was on the board, had. And we couldn't even find minutes. It was not good. Yeah. So about a year figuring out what the hell happened, and let's not go down that road again. And then another year and a half to convince the state that, gee, a different idea is probably a good thing. So we approached the state, and after going through all the history and understanding and sort of stepping back, we told them, here's what we told them. We said that there were some fundamental issues of how you were approaching this whole thing that need to change. First of all, any work that was done on the train had to be done by a vendor. DOT, who controls this, was treating it like, I'm going to repair a bridge. So I need to get bids, and I have contractors and all this stuff and fixed price. So, of course, it's the most expensive way to do anything. Second thing is they didn't want to use volunteers at all. Too much liability stuff. And if you look at anybody who's doing any restoration on rail equipment, volunteers makes it affordable. Because, it's like, so anyway, the other thing we found out that donors just, hey, the state owns this thing. Why should I give my money to the state of New Hampshire? And then when we started talking to grant sources, they said, we told them who we were, looking for grants. Great, that's terrific. Who owns it? The state. No, you have zero chance of getting any kind of grant money as long as it's the state. So we concluded that the first thing, we have to transfer ownership away from the state. It's the only way this thing's going to work. In fact, we were at the point where if this doesn't happen, we're done, because it's just not going to go anywhere. By spring of 22, state finally says, yeah, you're right, we agree, and we need to find a way to do this. But how does the state transfer ownership? Now, the normal way to get rid of something is you put it on the website as an auction, highest bidder takes it. That's it. That's probably was not acceptable. They also talked about trying to do something, and the problem was it's a state-owned asset. Can you give it to one organization without offering it to the world? So there was this whole business of, they need to follow the law and all that sort of stuff. So there was, can we do something with the Attorney General and the governor and kind of just slide this thing over to us? And the answer came back probably no. So the solution was this crazy thing. The Department of Transportation actually has a process for disposing of historic bridges. And it's very well documented. It's a procedure they use. And the state said, look, we can use this process, which already exists, to get rid of the train. So we said, sure. So we're in the middle of this now. This RFP process is underway. Before the RFP process started, which was, we want people to respond and say, what's your proposal? We're taking ownership of this train. Before they did that, they did a couple of things that were important. And the summer of 23, they had a consulting group come in, go through the train, its history and everything, and got it qualified for registration on the National Registry of Historic Places. So it is actually, it meets the criteria. And there are no, of the 4 surviving Zephyrs, none of them are on that list. So it qualifies. The other thing that came out with this process of let's use the bridge process, and it's a put out to the public. We'd like to transfer ownership, and we want you to apply. And that actually, the RFP was released November 3rd, and all the applications had to be in. What's the date today? Today. All the applications for owning the train had to be in by today. Should I leave and get it in, or? Okay, here's here's what's in this RFP. The applicant has to address the Secretary of Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties. Okay, that's a long words for they got it qualified for the National Historic Registry. There are rules that come with that. You can't do this, you can't do that. So, and you can write a book on how to do this, but there's all kinds of things that you have to follow. And they said, if you're going to apply to own the train, you need to follow the rules on historic preservation. So you can't turn it into a hot dog stand. They want to know in detail, how are you going to move it? Where are you going to put it? Makes sense. How will you preserve it and how are you going to maintain it? And then how are you going to guarantee that the public will have access? So the other thing that comes along with this is that the state actually has oversight of the project for the next 15 years. You have to do an annual report, you have subject to inspections, all this other stuff. So it made it a little difficult for a group that wanted to buy it and turn it into a restaurant or an attraction, or not be serious about trying to restore the thing and preserve it. So the time frame for this thing, the application's closed today. They have 60 days to respond to the applicants about whether they accept your proposal or not. After that, it has to go to, they will make a recommendation. They have 60 days to do that. It'll go to the governor's council for approval, and then the governor has to sign off on it. We don't know how long that's going to take. It could be 3 or 4 months after the 60 days before the governor says, yes, I approve. So we have an indefinite timeline here. Okay, so we applied. Our plan went in the very last week of December. It's about 30 pages long. So, and I'm going to tell you what we think we want to do, what we have planned, and I got to really emphasize all the stuff I'm telling you is based on what we know now. That could change, but based on what we know, what we'd like to do, this is our plan. First of all, we're not going to do this alone. It's a pretty complicated process. We actually have 9 organizations lined up that we've been talking to who are going to help us in one way or another to get this thing done. We have 2 levels. We have something called a project partner, which means they're going to be actively involved, not just send me a picture or send me this document. They're going to actually be actively involved. Conway Scenic is going to be very actively involved, and I'll get more into that. Wisconsin Great Northern. Why would we want them? Anybody know why? They have the Mark Twain Zephyr. So they're in the process of turning it, they got it as a shell, they're turning it into a dinner train. But what they're doing still has applies to us with how they got the cars back together, a lot of work they've done. They're going to be very helpful. We've actually made 2 trips out there to see the work that they've been doing. And they're fully on board to help us through this. We have a grants company that's going to work with us to source grants, manage grants, all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of money out there. Hunter Research is going to help us with all the regulatory, meeting the standards for preservation and doing their reports and keeping the state happy. And then New Hampshire Preservation Alliance is a state-based group that they can help you with grants. They also have a bunch of historically oriented companies they work with that do work. So if you're saying I'd like somebody who knows glass, they can find you someone who's historically oriented who will help you with the glass. Yeah, Tom. No, privately owned. Wisconsin is Zephyr is privately owned. They bought it. Then Project Resources, these are organizations who agreed to help us with information kind of stuff, pictures, drawings, their archives, that kind of thing. Chicago Museum of Industry, they have the Pioneer Zephyr. So it's a great source. They've already helped us. Boston and Maine Historical Society, I've been to their archives. They got a lot of stuff on the Yankee. Illinois Waverly Museum, they're helping us. They have a bunch of old Bud cars that they have worked on. They're also have built, I think, 30 buildings to house trains. So we're also using them to help us with that. And then the National Transportation Museum in St. Louis, they have the General Pershing Zephyr, which was the last Zephyr made, and it actually has it was the only one made without a Winton. It has an EMD 567 in it. So those are the groups that are going to help us. We are going to move the train and the containers to a permanent location where we're going to put up a building. And this building's going to be on leased land. We looked at buying land. Forget it. It was $350, $500, $600, $700,000 for land. We said we just can't take that money and do that. So we're going the lease route. The building is going to be jointly owned by Flying Yankee Association, which is us, and Conway Scenic. They need space, they need a building, so we're sort of joining forces. Shared space, staff, equipment, and overhead costs, so that we can have this place to put the train, work on it, store it, but also have somebody right there who's going to help us and also help with the cost of overhead of a building like that. This is a sketch of what the building's supposed to look like. 2 tracks. There will be a small museum at the site. We're still working on exactly what plot of land this thing is going to be on. The lease will be with Conway Scenic. They have a variety of properties available to them, and we're actually, hopefully the goal in in January, is to figure out which plot of land are we actually going to put this thing on. So Conway Scenic, as I said, is going to be a key resource. We have agreements with them, signed agreements for restoration, operating, and maintaining the train after it's up and running. We are our thinking right now is if we can get the Winton restored and in it, that is going to require us to only run it a few times a year. Because if we destroy the engine, I don't know how much you know about Wintons, but it's an important engine. There are few of them left, even few available to the public. So it's almost as important in some circles as the train. But we're going to try to limit the operation. So it'll spend more of its time on display than running around. Yeah, Tom. No, nobody has a sound decoder for the Winton. With microphones. It's a good fundraising thing. The question was, could we looking at a 567? We certainly talked about it. The problem is the historical standards don't encourage that. Now, if you get to the point where you have to do it, but you're going to make a pretty strong case that I have to do it. So we're not there yet. And the other thing is we've been told what condition the Winton is in and how many parts we have. We really don't know until we get the stuff out of the containers. Do we have a complete engine? What kind of shape is it really in? Can we really use it? So that we anyway, so it'll be on display in the building. It'll roll into Conway, actually the Conway Yard during high peak seasons for better exposure. Small museum at the building site. So anyway, if we're successful, and I think we are, going to be successful. We'll move the train to this building site, and then it'll be a full assessment, or what do we really got to work with? What condition things are, what's missing. We thought you had this, but you really don't have that. And, you really can't use the Winton. So what's your plan? But we really need to do this. Then we'll follow sort of annual plans of what systems we're going to work on. And we'll be realistic about doing it. And it will have to be funding based. Money's money, and you can only do so much work. We will use volunteers as much as we can to keep the cost down. We're not soliciting people yet because we technically don't own the train yet. But we have raised $470,000 in pledges.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm listening to a convention, the NMRA convention that's going on in the Seacoast right now.
anyway, so we've raised 470. We're seeking additional pledges. So pledges just, I pledge money. I'm not writing any checks yet because it doesn't make sense for anyone to give us any money if we don't own the thing. So we're sort of waiting for that line to be crossed. After we get ownership, then yeah, it'll be all stops out. Let's raise the money to keep going. So I'll stop there. Take questions. Yeah. Don't know. It's not going to be less than $1 million. It's going to be more than that. Between the building and the train itself. And really the building's a necessity because that's the problem with the thing. It's had no home. It's been a vagabond for years. So we're trying to give it a base to work from. So even if we don't have a lot of money the first couple of years, it's not going to be sitting out in the elements. It's going to be sitting in a building. So at least it's going to be preserved that way. The train is 192 feet. The building is 225 feet long. Yep. Optimistically, 5. If it was 10 years and we're still up, I'd be concerned. So if that gives you, yeah, right. So the question is it going to be 5 years or 10 years? We went up to the containers and did go through them, but unfortunately, when they were moved, they were packed very nicely. We have inventories of what's in each container. When you open the doors, the stuff just got tossed everywhere. So it was a shame, but it did. Other questions? And if you're excited, go to the donations page and make a pledge. There's a form there. And again, you don't have to write us a check yet. So, no, I actually don't. There's 9 people on the board. We got 2 preservationists, one who's has a ton of work at the Kennebunk, the Trolley Museum in Kennebunk. We have another guy who's very active with Danbury Museum. We have a marketing events guy. We have a computer guy. We have a couple of finance guys. I'm one of the finance guys. So we've got a real mixed bag of people. But we also realize that we need more help, which is why we brought all those other organizations in. They are. Yeah. They're all next to the track. We looked at buying land adjacent to the tracks. We just couldn't find anything. I will tell you that we did consider 2 other sites, one in Bartlett. They're going to do some stuff, but their timing was all wrong. They're another 5 years before they're ready for doing anything. We also talked to, late in the game, Patriot Rail contacted us, who are the new owners of Hobo. And they were interested, but they were a little too late to the game to do anything. Plus they had a lot of restrictions that would be a little more, we got enough restrictions to deal with. We don't need more. So but they're cooperating with us in terms of if we get the train, how fast we have to move it out. So they're interested and realize that it's a historic asset. They'd like to see it running somewhere. So yeah, it's a good match. All right. Great. Thanks.